Number 10. Sturmovic. During World War II, the Soviet Union manufactured a ground attack aircraft called the Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovic. Over 36,000 were made between 1941 and 1946, making it the most produced military aircraft in aviation history. Yet, only a dozen or so complete examples of the plane survive today. In 2017, Russian researchers recovered a rare single-seater Sturmovic from Lake Krivo in Murmansk Oblast. Naturally, the plane was rusted out and decaying, but it was in remarkably intact condition for an aircraft that crash-landed and then sat 60 feet, 18 meters underwater for 75 years. The team was still able to make out its serial number and Red Army insignia. Inside the cockpit, they found all kinds of propaganda papers and maps. It appears as though the Sturmovic force-landed after being struck by German troops. The pilot managed to fly it back into friendly territory before ditching it in the lake. Thankfully, he managed to escape. News articles published shortly after the plane's discovery reported that it's being restored to airworthy status. It'll be the first single-seat version of the Sturmovic capable of taking to the skies in this day and age. Number 9. Rare Italian tank. The L640 was a light tank used by the Italian military during World War II. Built by Fiat, it was used in the war against the Soviet Union, the Balkans campaign, which began when Italy invaded Greece in 1940, and the Northern African campaign, which saw warfare in Libya, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Only 3 of the armored vehicles survive today. One sits out Gjirokastër Castle in southern Albania. Dating back to the 12th century or perhaps earlier, the fortress functions as a military museum commemorating the communist struggle against imperial Western powers. In addition to the tank, the site contains a captured U.S. Air Force plane as well as captured artillery from the resistance against German occupation. Despite its rich history, Gjirokastër Castle is a lesser-known tourist site. The decommissioned vehicle stands by its lonesome as an eerie testament to one of Europe's darkest chapters in history. Another L640 is kept in Legnano, Italy, and the third is part of the Kubinka Tank Museum outside Moscow. Number 8. Soviet Helicopter Graveyard. The Cold War arms race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union ultimately left both countries with an oversupply of outdated military equipment, much of which has been left to rot in various places throughout the world. In 2016, images taken by an urban explorer named Sergei Rut revealed hundreds of old helicopters at an abandoned Russian Air Force base. Rut also entered a deserted military academy where he found uniforms, equipment, and part of a fighter jet. The adventurous photographer did not reveal the site's exact location out of fear that someone might vandalize it. It's clear based on his photos of graffiti-covered aircraft that this has already started to happen. Last year, similar images surfaced courtesy of a photographer named Lana Sator. She traveled to numerous military equipment graveyards across the country, capturing thousands of abandoned fighter planes, helicopters, tanks, and other machinery on film and with her drone. Her overhead images help to convey the sheer number of decaying, obsolete vehicles that are sitting in open fields and hangars. It's amazing how many there are. Much of the equipment was decommissioned around the time the Soviet Union collapsed. Many of these machines are too old and damaged to ever be used again. But the military could recommission thousands of old tanks, which are kept in graveyards called reserves, according to Sator, who spoke with The Sun. From 1945 to 1991, the Soviet Union had the world's largest active military, numbering between 4 and 5 million soldiers at its peak. These powerful forces owned some 20,000 tanks, 1,500 helicopters, and 30,000 armored combat vehicles, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. The Soviet Union was fraught with economic hardship in the months leading up to its collapse. It eventually became clear to those in power that they no longer had the resources to maintain the overabundance of military equipment or the ambitious projects that created the vehicles. Development came to a halt, and the state was left with more machines than it knew what to do with. Number 7. SS St. Christopher. Originally named the HMS Justice, the SS St. Christopher is a 165-foot-long, 50-meter rescue tug that was built for the U.S. Navy in 1943. But the Americans never actually used the wooden vessel. Instead, it fell into the hands of the British Royal Navy under the Land-Lease Act, which supplied U.S. allies with food, oil, and military equipment. During World War II, the St. Christopher did serve as a rescue tug. It was reportedly used during the Allied invasion of Normandy, famously known as D-Day in 1944. After the war ended, the tug was returned to the U.S. Navy, which sold it to a private buyer for commercial use. During the 1950s, the boat ran aground and encountered rudder damage and engine problems. It was grounded in the Beagle Channel in Ushuaia, Argentina. Ushuaia is famous for being the world's southernmost city. The partially submerged St. Christopher sits exactly where it was left nearly 65 years ago. Since then, it's become a tourist attraction, and it's even lit up at night. But nobody is allowed on the heavily damaged boat, which looks like it could finish sinking into the water any minute. Would you like to check out this abandoned boat in a place called the End of the World? Let us know in the comments down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Flamenco Beach Tanks. Culebra is a small island off Puerto Rico's east coast. The American military began using it in 1901 after Spain ceded Puerto Rico to the U.S. Then President Theodore Roosevelt designated the island's public land to the Navy, which carried out bombing and weapons practice there for decades. Yet no official base was ever established on Culebra Island. At some point, the military tried evicting the entire population, and the locals were not one bit happy about it. Starting in 1970, Culebra's residents resisted by staging peaceful protests. Using non-violent tactics like marches, sit-ins, and blockades, they did not stop until their voices were heard. They simply didn't want to leave their homes. The Navy eventually listened to the activists' demands and left. By 1975, the only military property left on Culebra Island consisted of some military gear and several large tanks. The smaller items were cleaned up, but the tanks remain on Flamenco Beach where they were left over 45 years ago. These rusting, graffiti-covered vehicles are impossible not to notice. They look strangely out of place against the stunning backdrop of the turquoise Caribbean Sea, clear skies, and white sands. Number 5. Lunichrono Plan. The Lun-class Chrono Plan was created in 1975 for the Soviet military. Nicknamed the Caspian Sea Monster, it was designed to fly just over the water at extremely low altitudes using an aerodynamic interaction called ground effect. In simple terms, this means that the aircraft's wings generate reduced drag over an even surface, for example water, enabling the vehicle to essentially float in the air. Only one Lun-Chrono Plan was ever fully built. Known as the MD-160, it flew roughly 13 feet, 4 meters above the water. It had a maximum cruising speed of 340 miles per hour and was equipped with 6 missile launchers. At some point during its service from 1987 to sometime during the late 90s, the Lun-Chrono Plan was the world's heaviest aircraft. For years, the MD-160 has sat abandoned at a Russian naval base in the Republic of Dagestan. It was finally towed away from the site last year with plans to put it permanently on public display. But the aircraft got stuck in the water, and it's unclear whether the government's plans for it have changed. There was only one other Lunichrono Plan, and it was never finished. It was meant to function as a mobile hospital, but was left 90% finished when the Soviet Union collapsed and military funding was abruptly cut off. What do you think the government should do with it now? Number 4. USS Sasham. The USS Sasham passed through many owners' hands. It was originally built in 1902 as a yacht for a wealthy railroad tycoon, but ended up spending much of its career serving in 2 major wars. During World War I, the U.S. military began renting boats from rich owners and using them to spot enemy submarines that were disrupting British and American supply lines. The Navy acquired the 186-foot-long, 57-meter USS Sasham and converted it into a military ship. They equipped it with machine guns, but this wasn't quite enough to fend off the Germans. To solve the problem, the military let Thomas Edison use the ship for his submarine combat experiments. When the war ended, the Navy returned the yacht to its owner. It became a fishing vessel for a short time until duty called once again during World War II. After Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Navy rented the yacht, this time naming it the USS Finnegate. Just like during the First World War, the boat's job was to spot German U-boats. Between both wars, it earned an American Campaign Medal and 2 Victory Medals. The decorated USS Sasham went back to civilian life after World War II ended. A New York City-based cruise line bought it during the 1940s and turned it back into a recreational vessel. During this time, it was named the Sightseer, then the Circle Line 5. During the late 80s, the yacht was featured in Madonna's Papa Don't Preach music video. After that, the Circle Line 5 was anchored along a tributary in the Ohio River near its owner's property in Petersburg, Kentucky. From there, it fell into disrepair. The boat hasn't moved since and is simply known among locals as the Ghost Ship. Its name is still visible on its rusting, overgrown hull. Seeing the yacht now, it's hard to imagine what it looked like during its years as a decked-out military ship or even as a luxury cruise liner. Number 3. Sogol Tank Cemetery. 4 miles, 6.4 kilometers outside the small town of Sogol, Germany, there's a small field that contains around 24 abandoned Leopard 1 and M47 Patton tanks. The rusting vehicles are arranged in neat lines, but nobody seems to know why they're there. Designed by Porsche, the Leopard 1 tank was designed as a main battle tank for West Germany during the Cold War. It entered into service in 1965. Nearly 6,500 of the tanks were produced, and the Leopard 1 became a popular choice among European militaries. The last of them were taken out of service by 2003 when they were replaced by the Leopard 2. Named after World War II General George S. Patton, the M47 was an American-built tank. It entered into service in 1951 and was used primarily by the U.S. Army and Marine Corps. The M47 has the distinction of being the only American tank that our military never used in combat. But it has seen war among other countries, and some are still in use today. Although there's no barrier preventing people from going near the decommissioned tanks, there's a sign warning visitors against trespassing and threatening to prosecute those who go onto the property. The tank cemetery may still be considered an active military site, and some suspect that the vehicles are used for target practice by helicopter pilots. While the sight of these tanks is impossible to ignore, German authorities are strangely secretive about them. We wonder why. Number 2. Aircraft Graveyard. Near the tiny Hungarian village of Nagy Gyamot, there's a small aircraft graveyard that contains an abandoned runway and over 30 military planes from bygone eras. Situated close to the modern-day Papa military base, the deserted property was built as an airbase during the 1930s. The Soviet Union took control of the site in 1945, and it remained in use until 1997, when all its planes were decommissioned. Some of the aircrafts were sold to museums and collectors, but others found their permanent home at the abandoned airbase. Their tanks were filled with cement so that nobody could try to fly them, and in 2001, any remaining military personnel left the site. The property is home to 5 Sukhoi Su-22s and 29 MiG-21 fighter jets. Both were developed by the Soviet Union and have a reputation for their effective fighting capabilities. In fact, many countries have used them in the decades since their introduction in the 1960s. The jets were especially popular among the Eastern Bloc countries, with the Hungarian Air Force employing over 250 MiG-21s at one point. Sadly, today they're sinking into the mud due to the weight of the concrete in their engines, and scavengers are dismantling the historic, decaying planes one piece at a time. Number 1. USS Oriskany. No country on Earth has more aircraft carriers than the United States. One of them was the USS Oriskany. Built for the U.S. Navy, it entered service just a few years after World War II ended. From then on into the 1970s, the ship operated primarily in the Pacific. It received 2 battle stars for its service in the Korean War and 10 for the Vietnam War. In 1966, a magnesium flare was accidentally lit aboard the Oriskany, causing a catastrophic fire to break out. 44 servicemen died in the blaze. The vessel was taken out of service in 1976. In 1995, it was sold for scrap, but the buyer didn't do anything with it, and it was repossessed 2 years later. During those years, the ship bounced around various shipyards in California and Texas. The Navy thought of a creative way to repurpose the Oriskany by sinking it off the Florida coast as an artificial reef. In late 2004, it was towed to Pensacola, where scientists performed tests to ensure that the ship would not pose any dangers to human or marine life after being submerged. Finally, in 2006, a team of Navy personnel sank the Oriskany in the Gulf of Mexico. After spending years aimlessly traveling from one shipyard to the next, the dilapidated vessel finally found its forever home. Nicknamed the Carrier Reef, it's one of the world's most popular diving sites. Thanks so much for watching. What did you think of these abandoned vehicles from wartime? Which one was your favorite? Let us know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.